The crystal chandelier cast fractured rainbows across the mahogany walls of Le Bernardin's private dining room, each shard of light dancing like the nervous energy that filled the space where 30 of the city's most powerful business leaders had gathered for their monthly networking dinner. The air hung thick with the scent of truffle oil and aged wine, punctuated by the low murmur of conversations worth millions of dollars and the soft clink of silverware against bone china. But tonight, something felt different in this sanctuary of wealth and influence, something that would shatter more than just light. Amara Williams moved between the tables with the practiced grace of someone who had learned to navigate spaces where she was simultaneously invisible and scrutinized. Her black uniform was pressed to perfection, her natural hair pulled back in a neat bun that spoke of professionalism, hard-won through years of proving herself in environments that questioned her presence. She carried herself with a quiet dignity that some mistook for subservience, but those who looked closer might have noticed the intelligence burning behind her dark eyes, the way she listened to every conversation while appearing to focus solely on refilling water glasses and clearing plates. If you've ever felt like you were underestimated because of how others saw you, then you understand why stories like this matter, and why hitting that subscribe button helps us share these truths that need to be told. At the head table sat Richard Blackstone, a real estate mogul whose empire stretched across 3 states and whose net worth had recently crossed the billion-dollar threshold. His silver hair was perfectly styled. His custom-tailored suit probably cost more than most people's cars, and his laugh carried the particular confidence that comes from never having to worry about money, consequences, or the opinions of people he considered beneath him. Tonight, he was holding court with his usual audience of sycophants and business partners, regaling them with stories of his latest acquisition and the little people who had tried to stand in his way. The thing about success, Blackstone was saying, his voice carrying across the room with practiced authority, is knowing your place in the world. Some people are born to lead, to build empires, to shape the future. Others, he gestured vaguely toward Amara as she refilled his wineglass, not bothering to lower his voice. Others are born to serve. It's the natural order of things. Amara's hand remained steady as she poured, but something flickered across her face so quickly that only the most observant would have caught it. She had heard variations of this speech before, in this room and others like it, from men who believed their bank accounts made them philosophers and their success made them wise. Take this place, for instance, Blackstone continued, warming to his theme. Everyone knows their role. The chef creates, the owner profits, the servers serve. It's a perfect ecosystem. No one tries to be something they're not. James Morrison, a tech entrepreneur seated to Blackstone's right, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Richard, don't you think that's a bit what? Honest? Blackstone's laugh was sharp and dismissive. James, you've gotten soft since your IPO. Success requires clarity about hierarchy, about who belongs where. Amara finished pouring and moved to the next table, but she could feel Blackstone's eyes following her, could sense the calculation in his gaze. She had worked at Le Bernardin for 3 years, had served hundreds of wealthy diners, but something about Blackstone felt different, more dangerous, more deliberate in his cruelty. What Blackstone didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Amara Williams had graduated summa cum laude from Columbia Business School 2 years ago. She had a master's degree in finance and had scored in the 99th percentile on her GMAT. She spoke 4 languages fluently and had written her thesis on sustainable urban development, a paper that had been published in 3 academic journals and cited by policymakers across the country. She also didn't know that her student loans totaled $180,000, that her mother was battling cancer and couldn't work, that her younger brother needed money for his senior year of high school, and that despite sending out over 200 resumes to investment firms, consulting companies, and corporate finance departments, she had received exactly 3 interviews and 0 job offers. The rejections always came with the same polite language about cultural fit and not quite what we're looking for at this time. But Amara had learned to read between the lines. She had learned that her name, her address, her graduation photo, and her interview presence all sent signals that hiring managers claimed not to see, but somehow always influenced their decisions. So she worked at Le Bernardin, earning enough to keep her family afloat while continuing to apply for positions that matched her qualifications. She told herself it was temporary, that eventually someone would see past their assumptions and recognize her potential. But 3 years was a long time to wait for eventually. Amara, called Margaret Chen, the restaurant's manager, from across the room. "Mr. Blackstone would like to speak with you." Amara felt her stomach tighten, but she walked over to the head table with the same composed expression she wore for every interaction. "Yes, sir." Blackstone looked up at her with the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "I was just telling my colleagues here about the importance of knowing one's place. You've been working here for what, 3 years? "Yes, sir." "And in that time, have you ever thought about doing something else? Something more ambitious?" The question felt like a trap, but Amara couldn't see the spring mechanism yet. "I'm grateful for my position here, sir." "Grateful. That's exactly what I mean." Blackstone turned to his tablemates as if Amara weren't standing right there. "Gratitude, acceptance of one's station, these are admirable qualities in the service industry." Morrison frowned. "Richard, what's your point?" "My point is that some people understand their limitations and work within them. They don't waste time chasing dreams that are beyond their reach." Blackstone's gaze returned to Amara. "Tell me, dear, did you finish high school?" The question hit like a slap, but Amara kept her expression neutral. "Yes, sir. Community college. I attended Columbia University, sir." A few people at the table looked surprised, but Blackstone's smile only widened. "Oh, Columbia! How impressive! What did you study?" "Business administration with a focus on finance. And yet, here you are, serving wine to your betters." Blackstone's laugh was cruel and deliberate. "I suppose they'll let anyone into college these days. Diversity quotas and all that." The room had gone quiet now, other conversations dying as people sensed the tension building at the head table. Amara felt heat rising in her cheeks, but she had learned long ago that reacting to provocations like this only made things worse. "Education is important," she said carefully, "but so is honest work." "Honest work? Yes, I suppose that's one way to look at it." Blackstone leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying himself. "Though I have to wonder what Columbia's admissions office was thinking. I mean, surely there were more qualified candidates, students who actually belonged there." Morrison stood up abruptly. "Richard, that's enough." "Enough what?" "I'm simply making conversation with our server. Isn't that right, dear? We're just chatting about your educational background and career aspirations." Amara felt the familiar weight of humiliation settling on her shoulders, the same feeling she'd carried through countless interactions with professors who questioned her presence in advanced courses, classmates who assumed she was there on charity, and employers who looked at her resume and saw affirmative action rather than achievement. But something was different tonight. Maybe it was the wine, maybe it was the accumulated weight of 3 years of rejection and condescension, or maybe it was simply that she was tired of being treated as if her intelligence was invisible. "Actually, sir," she said, her voice steady and clear, "I'd be happy to discuss my educational background with you." Blackstone's eyebrows rose. "Oh, would you? How delightful. I graduated summa cum laude with a 3.97 GPA. I scored 760 on the GMAT, which placed me in the 99th percentile. My thesis on sustainable urban development was published in the Journal of Urban Economics, the Harvard Business Review, and the International Review of Financial Analysis." The table had gone completely silent now. Blackstone's smile faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. "How impressive. And yet you're here, serving wine. One might wonder why someone with such credentials would choose the service industry." "One might," Amara agreed. "Yeah, or one might wonder why someone with such credentials has been rejected from 200 positions, despite being more qualified than many of the candidates who were hired instead." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had been smoldering for years. Blackstone's face darkened, and Amara realized she had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "Are you suggesting," Blackstone said slowly, "that there's some kind of conspiracy against you, some systematic bias that's keeping you from achieving your potential?" "I'm not suggesting anything, sir. I'm simply stating facts." "Facts?" Blackstone's laugh was harsh now, all pretense of civility abandoned. "Let me tell you a fact, dear. Success in business requires more than just test scores and fancy degrees. It requires character, integrity, and the ability to inspire confidence in others. Perhaps the reason you haven't found employment in your field has less to do with bias and more to do with your own limitations." Morrison started to speak again, but Blackstone held up a hand to silence him. "In fact," Blackstone continued, "I'll make you a proposition, a little test, if you will." Amara felt every eye in the room on her, felt the weight of whatever was coming next. "I'm currently developing a mixed-use property in downtown Brooklyn, residential and commercial space, about a $500 million project. I need someone to analyze the financial projections and market feasibility." Blackstone's smile was predatory now. "If you're as qualified as you claim to be, you should be able to handle that, shouldn't you?" "I believe so, yes." "Excellent. I'll give you 1 week to prepare a comprehensive analysis. If your work meets my standards, I'll personally ensure you get interviews at 3 of the top investment firms in the city. But if it doesn't," he shrugged, "well, I suppose that will prove my point about knowing one's place." The challenge felt like another trap, but Amara couldn't see any way to refuse without confirming everything Blackstone believed about her. "I accept," she said quietly. "Wonderful. I'll have my assistant send you the relevant documents tomorrow." Blackstone turned back to his dinner companions as if Amara had already disappeared. Now, where were we? As Amara walked away from the table, she felt a mixture of terror and determination coursing through her veins. She had just committed to proving herself to a man who clearly wanted her to fail, in front of an audience that would remember every detail of her humiliation if she couldn't deliver. But she had also done something else. She had stopped being invisible. The next morning, Amara received an email from Blackstone's assistant containing over 300 pages of financial documents, architectural plans, market research, and legal filings related to the Brooklyn development project. As she scrolled through the materials, she realized that this wasn't just a test, it was a comprehensive analysis that would normally take a team of analysts weeks to complete. Blackstone wasn't just challenging her, he was setting her up to fail. Over the next 7 days, Amara worked with an intensity that surprised even her. She took vacation days from the restaurant, spending 18 hours a day poring over spreadsheets, building financial models, researching comparable properties, and analyzing market trends. She called in favors from former classmates who worked at consulting firms, reached out to professors who remembered her work, and even contacted city planning officials to verify zoning regulations. What she discovered in those documents made her stomach turn. The Brooklyn project wasn't just financially questionable, it was potentially fraudulent. The market research had been manipulated to inflate projected rental rates. The construction cost estimates were artificially low, missing major expenses that would inevitably surface during development. Most damning of all, the environmental impact studies had been falsified to hide the fact that the proposed site sat on contaminated soil that would require millions of dollars in remediation. Blackstone wasn't just testing her analytical skills. He was involving her in what appeared to be a massive investment fraud that would bilk investors out of hundreds of millions of dollars and leave low-income residents displaced from their neighborhood. But here's what made the situation even more complex. If Amara exposed the fraud, she would be accusing one of the city's most powerful businessmen of criminal activity. If she was wrong, her career would be over before it started. If she was right but couldn't prove it, the result would be the same. And if she simply completed the analysis as requested, pretending not to see the irregularities, She would be complicit in a scheme that would harm countless people. What would you do in that situation? When exposing the truth could destroy your future, but staying silent makes you part of the problem. Tell me in the comments what choice you think you'd make, because this is where the story gets really complicated. Amara spent the 6th night staring at her laptop screen, wrestling with a decision that felt impossible. She thought about her mother's medical bills, her brother's college applications, her own student loans that grew larger every month. She thought about the 3 years she'd spent serving wine to people who treated her like furniture, the 200 rejection letters that had slowly eroded her confidence, the weight of expectations from a family that had sacrificed everything for her education. But she also thought about the families who would be displaced by Blackstone's development, the investors who would lose their life savings, the precedent that would be set if powerful men could commit fraud with impunity simply because they knew no one would believe the accusations of a black waitress. On the morning of the 7th day, Amara made her choice. She arrived at Le Bernardin 2 hours before the restaurant opened, carrying a leather portfolio that contained not just her analysis of Blackstone's project, but copies of every document that supported her conclusions about the fraud. She had spent the previous night creating a presentation that was thorough, professional, and devastating. Blackstone arrived precisely at noon, accompanied by Morrison and 2 other men Amara didn't recognize. They were seated at the same table where this had all begun, and Amara was summoned to present her findings. "Well," Blackstone said with obvious amusement, "let's see what our ambitious waitress has prepared for us." Amara opened her portfolio and began to speak. Her voice was steady, her presentation flawless. She walked them through the financial projections, the market analysis, the construction timeline, and the regulatory requirements. For 20 minutes, she demonstrated a mastery of complex financial concepts that left the men at the table visibly impressed. "This is quite thorough," Morrison admitted. "Richard, you might want to consider—" "Oh, I'm not finished," Amara said quietly. She turned to a new section of her presentation, one that Blackstone hadn't expected. "While conducting my analysis, I discovered several irregularities in the supporting documentation that I feel obligated to bring to your attention." Blackstone's smile froze on his face. "The market research appears to have been manipulated to inflate projected rental rates by approximately 40%. The construction cost estimates are missing several major expense categories, including environmental remediation that will be required due to soil contamination on the proposed site. And the environmental impact studies contain data that directly contradicts findings from the EPA's own assessment of the area." The silence at the table was deafening. "What are you suggesting?" Blackstone asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I'm not suggesting anything, sir. I'm reporting my findings based on the documents you provided and additional research I conducted to verify their accuracy." Additional research. "I contacted the EPA, the City Planning Office, and several construction firms to verify the information in your materials. I also cross-referenced your market research with actual rental data from comparable properties in the area." Blackstone's face had gone pale. "You had no authority to contact those agencies. I had every authority to conduct thorough due diligence, which is what any competent analyst would do when reviewing a project of this magnitude." Morrison leaned forward. "Amara, are you saying that this project involves fraudulent documentation?" "I'm saying that the documentation provided contains significant inaccuracies that would materially misrepresent the project's viability to potential investors." The words hung in the air like an indictment. Blackstone stood up slowly, his hands shaking with rage. "And you have no idea what you're doing," he said. "No idea who you're dealing with. I could destroy you with a phone call." "Yes, sir, I'm sure you could." Amara's voice remained calm. "But that wouldn't change the facts. Facts. You're a waitress with delusions of grandeur. No one will believe a word you say." "Perhaps not," Amara agreed. "But they might believe the EPA, or the City Planning Office, or the construction firms who confirm that your cost estimates are fraudulent." Blackstone's face was purple now. You're finished. In this city, in this industry, everywhere. I'll make sure of it. Richard, Morrison said quietly, maybe you should sit down. Don't tell me to sit down. Blackstone whirled on Morrison. This is exactly what I was talking about. Give these people an inch, and they think they can tear down everything we've built. These people? Morrison's voice was ice cold now. You know what I mean? No, Richard, I don't think I do. Why don't you explain it to me? Blackstone seemed to realize he had said too much, but the damage was done. The mask had slipped, revealing the ugly truth that had been lurking beneath his polished exterior all along. I think this meeting is over, Morrison said, standing up. Amara, thank you for your analysis. It was illuminating. As the men filed out of the restaurant, Blackstone paused at Amara's side. This isn't over, he whispered. You have no idea what you've started. But Amara was no longer afraid. She had found something in that moment that she hadn't felt in 3 years, her own power. The next morning, Amara received a phone call from James Morrison. I wanted to apologize for yesterday, he said. Richard's behavior was inexcusable. Thank you, sir. I also wanted to ask you something. Would you be interested in a position at Morrison Capital? We're looking for a senior analyst, and based on what I saw yesterday, you're exactly what we need. Amara felt tears spring to her eyes. Sir, Yes, I would be very interested. Excellent. Can you start Monday? What about Mr. Blackstone? Morrison's laugh was grim. Let me worry about Richard. He's about to have much bigger problems than you. 3 weeks later, the FBI raided Blackstone's offices as part of a federal investigation into investment fraud. The Brooklyn project was shut down, and Blackstone was arrested on charges that could send him to prison for 20 years. The investigation had been triggered by an anonymous tip that included detailed financial analysis and supporting documentation. Amara never confirmed that she had been the source of that tip, but she didn't deny it either. 6 months later, she was promoted to vice president at Morrison Capital, making more money than she had ever dreamed possible. She paid off her student loans, covered her mother's medical expenses, and set up a college fund for her brother. But more importantly, she had learned something about herself that no amount of rejection letters could take away. She belonged wherever her intelligence and integrity could take her. The last time Amara saw Richard Blackstone, he was being led out of a courthouse in handcuffs, his empire in ruins, his reputation destroyed. Their eyes met for just a moment, and she saw something in his expression that might have been respect, or maybe it was just fear. Either way, Amara Williams was no longer invisible. If this story has reminded you that courage comes in many forms, that standing up for what's right is always worth the risk, and that the people who underestimate you might just be giving you the greatest gift of all, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to stay in the place where others think you belong.